Archie
chat,
versus
bro. Who do you
horseshit
guys
guy,
got,
bro.
bro?
Honestly, bro, I might have Apollo, bro.
Why do you
He
keep
beat Charlie. He
mentioning
beat Charlie Kirk. He beat Charlie Kirk, bro. Like what? Come on, bro.
recently?
Wait, I see the
Yes,
live
bro.
stream where I saw that.
I can't lie. I don't
Right.
trust the power. Y'all gonna have to get somebody in here to record. Can't lie.
I'd hop on PC. I just don't feel like getting out of bed. But I don't know.
Fuck it, just start. Who cares anyway?
Wait, hold
Yeah,
on.
well,
what do you have to
He's-
Wait for the pings. Wait for
God's
the pings.
existence,
So,
right?
let's see. Oh yeah, you're a theist, right, Apollo? You can like lay out.
No, he said he's gonna be right back. He said he's gonna be right back.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's
I think he's
to the
gonna use like
bathroom.
that really shitty like argument Arianas gave him about like defining God into existence with predicate. That's like so bad.
So you've already basically what you're saying is your game plan is like you already analyzed. You know what he is gonna do before he even knows what he's
Oh,
doing. Is that what
I could tell you the script. So it's gonna be like 70% of like rehearsed garbage that like that's like got him clowned by most of the philosophy column. He's gonna be like, you know to talk. You don't understand the argument. You know, you're gonna respond to his point. He's gonna push past it, realizing you're in his bad spot. You know, probably meta point, argue a little bit, like that fiction to calm, like really shitty tactic. And then I'm probably gonna get him back on point. He's gonna claim I'm dodging when I try to get him back on point. You're not answering my questions. You know that whole.
I feel like this
debate.
debate. I feel like this debate is unstoppable force versus immovable object.
Oh well, it's really.
Hey.
I mean, he survived the hurricane. He is the immovable object.
Okay, chill. That's not. Cool
That's
to joke
fucked up.
about.
That's fucked up.
Not cool to joke about, bro.
I don't know why I'm laughing. It's not funny, but I don't know. It just caught me off guard. Bro. I'm just gonna move down.
I'm nervous, bro. I'm nervous. Well, speaking of, who do you guys have, bro?
Yeah, let's
Islam
have
Makhachev?
them both up here. Just them.
Oh yeah, bro. Who do you guys have, bro? Islam Makhachev or JDM? I have Islam personally.
Oh, who?
I
JDM?
have Islam over JDM, bro.
Nah, yeah, Islam's gonna freaking destroy him, bro.
Bro, I've seen so many freaking like Islamophobe retards, bro, in the comments, like Twitter, like commenting under shit, bro.
Bro, Twitter is a Nazi app, bro. Twitter's a Nazi app, bro. Like every single comment section is full of like you can see the most wholesome video ever, bro, and it'll just be the most racist comments ever, bro. Like just like Twitter's actually just a cesspit of evil, bro.
That's true. Wait, Hyde, can you record, by the way? Or no?
They're about to debate on God's existence.
Okay.
What position
All right, guys,
are you
I'm ready
taking?
now.
What position are you both taking?
I'm an agnostic atheist.
Yeah.
Okay.
You said
And
what? Sorry.
Apollo? He said he's an agnostic atheist.
Okay, gotcha. And I'm gonna be a theist. I'm a theist. So
Okay,
just to be
sure,
clear,
you guys
Archie,
can
do you
start.
think you're justified in your epistemic attitude of being agnostic on God's existence?
Justified is in that I have like inferential reason behind a proposition I believe in.
No, like you have good justification behind you being agnostic. So usually when someone is agnostic on a given proposition, they're agnostic because they think all the available data does not serve as evidence for the proposition, right? And so they're agnostic. So I'm asking you, do you believe, given all the things you're aware of, you're justified in being agnostic?
Yeah, it was like a really bad blunder. I mean, we can potentially
Blunder?
correct this though. You may have to get moderation. The horseshit guys are talking again. I mean, the main idea is like really this. Like, so there's generally like two kinds of justification. Like you could talk about inferential justification, in which you're just simply saying that we have like credence, or not credence, but we have reason to believe in a given proposition due to the fact that there are like prior reasons. And in this kind of inference, we're going to say like that these set of reasons, if accepted to be true, justify whatever proposition you're trying to reason to. In which, if you're talking about that justification, which is like the most common and most uncontroversial kind of justification, I don't believe you can be justified in something like agnosticism or atheism, because it's not some kind of like belief. Generally, like when we talk about
one can have a good reason to be an agnostic?
like doxastic attitudes, like your doxastic attitude that you have towards a given proposition like God's existence, one might say like you have a positive doxastic attitude, which like maybe like motivates some reason to justify your proposition that you believe in. But for an atheist, or for someone who's an agnostic atheist, it's actually like a disbelief, right? That's their attitude. So it's rather than simply saying that they believe in a given proposition, such as God does not exist, right? It's more so that they just don't believe in the proposition God does exist, which is to say that they simply withhold or have like epistemic restraints towards believing in the proposition. For example, like if I were to ask you how many stars do you think are in the universe, like whether they're even or odd, right? And you told me that you don't take a stance on it. I said, do you believe they're even? And you said no. That doesn't specifically designate you into the kind of camp that believes the amount of stars in the universe are odd, right? Even if you don't believe they're even, right? Simply, that just means you can hold restraints and be agnostic towards it. So if you're talking about that justification, then no, I wouldn't have justification due to the fact that there's no given proposition that I believe in regards to this domain. But there's another kind of justification that could like reconcile that blunder you made. I mean, it could just be that you're talking about non-inferential justification, in which that would like probably coincide with views like PC and kind of controversial views in epistemology, in which if that's the kind of justification you're talking about, I guess I'd have to like ask why anyone would endorse those kinds of views, because I don't endorse those views in my background. But yeah, that's like the general response.
Yeah, so what Archi just did, by the way, is the typical Archi dumbfuck debate strategy where he rants on irrelevant points and not even attack the actual points here. So what he just did was give different perspectives of how he could actually interpret justification, but not actually point out the blunder, what even was the blunder. Now, of course, to the average person who is not as retarded as you are, they can understand that a flat earther is not actually justified with the position, or someone who is agnostic, for example, on whether or not the Earth is flat, even despite seeing all the scientific evidence favoring that proposition that the Earth is not flat, would not be justified to be agnostic. And just to be clear on this, just to basically dumb this down for your level, since you're very hard, or rather your brain is doing a very bad job at grasping this very simplistic concept. And I'm talking about if you have justification, I'm asking if you have good reason, if you're acting in alignment with what the ideal epistemic rational agent would actually do under these circumstances. So the ideal epistemic rational agent, if they're being presented with the evidence in favor of a given proposition, they would believe that proposition. If there's no evidence given their current informational data set with respect to a given proposition, they'll be agnostic on a given proposition. So I'm asking, and I'm going to re-ask the question, which you've not even answered because you're dumb, fucking, you're retarded, and you're low IQ, right? I'm going to ask you this question. With respects to the God existence proposition, given all the information you're aware of, even though you're aware of very little information because you're ignorant, would you have a good reason to be an agnostic, or do you believe that all your information in your data set currently does not serve as good evidence for God existing? Yes or no? I don't want to fluff and rant, or want a yes or no to my piece when responding. Sorry.
I don't know what that like Jamaican rant was about, but I guess to respond to your point though, yeah, if I didn't make that clear enough, what blunder you made. So when someone says they're an agnostic, which is just to say that maybe if you were to look at like a line of degree of their belief towards a given proposition, they might just say they're on an equilibrium kind of stance, right? In which like just we are in the middle of degrees, actually have some level of freedom, just degree. When you ask justification of is it or justification for generally opposition, like opposition statement within those inferential lines of justification, right? Those are the only sentences that are going to be on the main display when we're trying to construct arguments. So I'll like walk you through this free educational course, Apollo. So when we're constructing arguments, so for example, let's just give a basic argument, you know, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, Socrates is immortal. We might want to say that if you were to replace one of those sentences, if you were to take one of those sentences out, let's imagine like we just have all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is immortal, validity might be some kind of question. Why so, right? Well, because, I mean, obviously, you're not getting to any kind of point in which Socrates is being actually implemented or invoked within that kind of line of reasoning, right? We're not too sure what you believe regarding Socrates, you know, being some kind of like man, right? So you might ask whoever constructing this argument, what do you believe? Socrates is a man? If they were to say no, right, presumably it would be strange. It would be like very, very queer. It'd be very weird to ask them for justification in that, right? Just simply due to the fact that, well, they don't actually have, you know, any kind of reason to believe. They're not defending that kind of proposition. They're just holding restraints on it, but they're just saying they don't really know about it, so they don't want to make some kind of affirmation on it. And due to that, right, the syllogism seemingly would fall apart. It would actually be as if they aren't even trying to justify anything. Okay, let's try to take this back to the debate. So when you ask me for justification behind my agnosticism towards God, right, presumably what you're doing is asking me for some kind of reasons that seem to entail a given proposition that I'm talking about. But if I'm agnostic towards the proposition Apollo, that means I'm not affirming it, right? I'm not denying it. I'm just simply saying I don't believe in it, right? Disbelief can look, you know, two different ways. So For example, like if I were to say I do not believe that there's an even amount of stars in the universe, Apollo, that's not going to be something that really takes away from whether there actually are or not. That's not going to be something that I'm affirming that there's an odd amount of stars in the universe, right? I'm not even exhausting the disjunction. I'm not just exhausting whether it is even or odd, right? Rather, I'm just holding restraints on affirming either disjunct. Okay, so that's like just explaining the blunder to address like your really bad dog shit points. I mean, yeah, it's really as simple as this. So when someone like says that they have it, that they're agnostic or whatever, I'm glad you put together like your like 2 cents of social skills, right? Yeah, they're typically saying like they haven't been presented evidence or evidence maybe at all, or any kind of justification to believe in something. Now, this is something that should like be put clear because like I've kind of seen you blunder on this during your debates with Synth and stuff like that. Like I think you like big fused in like evidence, like the whole evidence appeal. I'm not really too sure what you understand evidence to be, but like of like probability theories, evidence is just a probabilistic device that tends to raise the probability of some kind of given hypothesis or working explanation. For example, we might say that evidence is whatever data that tends to raise its probability. So like we might say X is evidence for Y, just in the case that X raises the probability of Y. So, but we can raise the probability by like 0.1%, right? That 1% of data might be considered evidence for a hypothesis, and that might not even be strong evidence. So I want to also make this clear before I let you like get out your rhetorical blows and like Jamaican gibberish. The main idea is like, even if you demonstrate evidence, that's not to say that this is a good amount of evidence. And even if I say that I have seen evidence, that's not to say that I have reason to believe in a given hypothesis or reason to believe in this. Not just that, but even if there tends to be evidence for a given hypothesis, it seems that other hypotheses could also expect the same amount of data, right? So unless there's like very obvious preferabilities, maybe virtues that we might favor, maybe probability constraints that may, when we consider it, grant us some kind of, favor towards a given hypothesis or working explanation, evidence alone is not going to be any reason. So I'm not really sure where you brought that up. I might, render that as like a blunder number 2, but you might be able to defend that. Okay, you're allowed to go.
Okay, that was a long one, Archie. So just to respond to the couple of things, I mean, the chat can even observe this. Mom was even laughing at you in the chat. You're shaking. You sound like you're breathing really hard for some reason. They're really nervous in this conversation. Trust me. But like, get on to the actual points. The point I'm talking about here simply, I'm not talking about justification with respect to a proposition. I'm talking about justification with respect to an epistemic attitude. Justification deals with normativity in the general sense. You have epistemic norms, you have moral norms, you have prudential norms, you have legal norms. There are several types of norms with respect to justification broadly. If you look at epistemology, if you look at any entry level to epistemology, which you've never looked at because you don't have the knowledge and you don't have the IQ and the intelligence to even grasp this rudimentary level stuff on epistemology. But justification, broadly speaking, is a reason which favors something. Now, you can have epistemic justification, which is reasons favoring a particular proposition or belief. You can have justification in the normative sense. I'm talking about justification in the normative sense. Justification with respect to whether you have good reasons counting in favor of you participating in this agnostic type mental attitude. And we can give examples of case scenarios where someone is not justified to be agnostic in the broad sense. So take into consideration the evidence favoring Einstein's relativity. See a lot of experiments demonstrate it. See muon particle experiments, muon particle acceleration experiments proven relativity. We see a lot of experiments in physics proven or demonstrated as to why Einstein's relativity theory is correct. And we all see the mathematical evidence, mathematical equations, the predictions, and the accuracy of this theoretical framework. Now, if someone was to have all of that knowledge, would they be justified to be agnostic? The answer is no. Meaning they don't have good reason to be agnostic. They don't have good reason to be acting in this particular attitude as an epistemic agent, given the available evidence that has been presented to them. In other words, if they've been presented with this evidence, for example, and they're still agnostic on the proposition, that means they are being what we would call it delusional. They're being biased, or they're being someone who is ignorant of the actual facts. They're not accepting the facts there. So I'm asking you, with respect to your very, very, very limited data set and knowledge, considering how ignorant you actually are and how that's being demonstrated on display on several different occasions in this conversation, do you believe that you have good reason to be agnostic on the proposition? Not if you have good reason to be agnostic and so forth, and treating agnosticism to be a proposition, and not treating agnosticism to be a proposition. I'm telling you, you have good reason to be agnostic on the proposition God exists, even what you know. In other words, I'm basically asking you to demonstrate that all the data pieces in your knowledge set is the types of things does not count as evidence in favor of God exists. But you don't even understand this for everyone. So I had to break that down for you, in other words, and just to clarify for the boys and everyone who's listening. I'm not treating his position of being agnostic on the proposition to be a proposition. When I say justification, it's pretty conspicuous, it's pretty obvious to anyone with an IQ above 25, which sadly Archi is not a part of, that when I'm talking about justification, I'm talking about justification insofar as reasons to do something, right? Insofar as his reason, if he has good reason to be agnostic on this proposition. Not if he has propositional justification or his epistemic justification for belief. I'm asking if he has good justification for participating in this cognitive activity for being agnostic on the proposition. And I've given examples for this. An example, again, I can repeat for the retard. If I'm being presented with all the evidence favoring that God exists, if I still reject or if I'm still agnostic or take the position of skepticism on God existing, then ideally, from the rational epistemic agent observer perspective, I am not justified in being agnostic because there are reasons which outweighs and undermines my epistemic attitude of being agnostic. So hopefully you'll understand in the second or the third try rather that that was not a blunder, but that was rather something he believed to be a blunder because of his limited perspective on what justification actually means broadly in the field of normativity, which is much larger than the scope of mere propositional justification or non-propositional justification, for example. That's basically it. You can respond now, retard.
Yikes. Okay, let's just try to get you back on like the tracking wheels because like you really blundered that super bad. So listen, I know it was like your birthday yesterday, so I'm just gonna give you like a free educational course, and I know you just really want someone to shit on you because you're a shit fetish. So I guess I'll just help you out really quick. I mean, the main idea is just simply this. So first off, propositional justification, you fucking idiot, is just the kind of state in which you just have data and available good reason to believe in a given proposition, but your doc's attitude may or may not match that. So I mean, we could really break this down in a few examples. So, like, let's just imagine that you're in some kind of class. You know, like, let's just imagine you're in, like, I don't know, like some kind of evolutionary class. You're just taking an evolutionary theory course, right? And they present you with wonderful evidence. They present you with fossil records, all kinds of stuff, you know, and it still really isn't good enough for you. So let's imagine you randomly walk to a store. You buy an 8-ball. And it randomly on the 8-ball, when you shake it 3 times, it says dinosaurs exist, right? And then you suddenly believe dinosaurs exist. Like you take in the background data, you corroborate on it. So that's an example of how you can have propositional justification, right? You obviously have the data in front of you. I mean, you're taking an evolutionary theory course, but you just simply don't have your actual reason why you believe, which is because of the 8-ball. It doesn't actually match up or line up with those given reasons, right? So clearly, I'm not just talking about propositional justification. Okay, let's just try to put you back on track. So what I'm talking about, right, is the kind of justification, inferential justification, in which I've already explained this to you. So if you're talking about a different kind of justification, right, in which you're using like reason, like you're kind of equivocating on it, like you're wanting me to provide some kind of like some kind of propositions that seem to be true, in which if we accept those to be true, grant like reason for my agnosticism, you're just talking about another form of inferential justification in which presumably the proposition that you want me to justify is the fact that I have good reason to be agnostic. If that's where you're getting into and you're already like dodging around and like trying to prevaricate from laying out your argument for theism, that's completely fine. We can get past like this short like cutscene. Be clear, the reason why I'm agnostic, right, is because it doesn't appear to me like there's any kind of good evidence. That I've encountered with the facts I'm acquainted with, obviously that would leave me rendered as an agnostic, right? So if you have some kind of evidence, some kind of data in which you do believe is good evidence that both of us are acquainted with or that you'd like to acquaint me with, you can lay that out, right? But if you care to prevaricate and embarrass yourself more, shitter, then you can, right? So this is your time to speak. You can like yap about like Jamaican shit a little bit more. I'll get bored though, so I'll probably have to move on soon.
Okay, so are you worth the fine-tuning arguments, yes or no?
Where I was beating something. What did you say?
I was asking, are you aware of the fine-tuning arguments?
Which one?
The generally Bayesian fine-tuning argument, which utilizes the bare fact of the conditional probability of God existing given life existing conditions being more likely than the negation, which is atheism, obviously.
I'm familiar. You want to lay it out?
You said yes, right? So before I lay out that argument, because that's not the argument I'll be using, you're making the claim fundamentally. It took you like 3 tries to actually understand what my question was coming at, by the way. But the question I was asking was, again, as you finally tracked, It was not me asking you for propositional or non-propositional justification for belief. I understand, Archie. It's very hard, or it's very easy, sorry, to understand that you're not making the claim that this thing is true, this thing is false. However, I was asking about whether or not you had good reasons or motivations in, for example, believing or acting in this particular means, and so far as you're agnostic on the proposition. Now that I've gotten that clear and so far as I'm not asking for any epistemic justification or evidence for even belief or any of that, I'm just asking if you have good reasons in the ideal sense to adopt this position. Considering that you're aware of the Bayesian-Feinstein argument, you'd have to be making the claim that essentially the Bayesian-Feinstein argument is not good evidence from your perspective because you're aware of the Bayesian-Feinstein argument. So how do you prove to me that the Bayesian-Feinstein argument is not good evidence for the proposition, considering that you're aware of the Bayesian-Feinstein argument, and irrespective of being aware of the Bayesian-Feinstein argument, you still believe there's no good evidence currently for the proposition that God exists or for the proposition that God is opposite? How do you prove this, Archie?
If the proposition you're intending me to provide as a conclusion, or the whatever proposition is being entailed, and the final line of that proof, if the proposition is the fine-tuning argument is not good evidence, I'm not really too sure what this means in this context. You could be like trying to say a few different things here. Like you could just be trying to say that it's like expected under a given hypothesis. I mean, maybe an argument is expected under a given hypothesis. Who knows? That's not the kind of claim I'm making. If that's what you're confused on, I never claimed that. If what you meant to say is that it seems that I'm not like convinced by the argument. If that's like what you tried to say and that message got like lost in translation in the Jamaican accent, I mean, yeah, so I'm not making that proposition. I'm not committing to the proposition that, it's not like good evidence or whatever you're using it as, or that it's not good. I just don't see a reason why that would be any reason to believe in God, right? I'm not saying it can't be good reason, right? Yeah, I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. I'm just not saying it's necessarily good. I don't really take much of I don't know, I guess a huge stance. I mean, I think there's a lot of, potential issues with the fine tuning. It's kind of controversial in a lot of philosophy. Not a lot of people even think that it really gets you to God, the fine tuning argument itself. So just to say, I don't really see why that's a good reason to believe in God. That's like a bit divorced from committing to the proposition that it isn't. So I don't know why you tried to sneak in that really weird burden shift, but if you want to lay out the argument, you can. Unless we're just going to do this weird burden shift thing.
Okay, so just a couple of things, right? So
oh, yeah, you got quick on that burden shift, huh?
You're not finished? Finished now? God. It just so hilarious to me, caught me off guard really when you talk about Jamaican accent, but then just proceed to be like you're just stuttering over yourself, just embarrassing stuff. So just to get back to the point, just don't talk about speed because you're already just sadly dog shit. So to get back to the actual points you're arguing, we both shook hands on the point with respect to the idea that if someone has been presented with the evidence, for example, let's say there is a particular epistemic agent, okay? Well, let's say, for example, has all the evidence, they are aware of all the evidence favoring that the earth is round, and they still maintain the stance of agnosticism on the position, then they're not justified in the sense where they have good reason to be agnostic because they have evidence favoring the problems. They would be, in other words, dishonest or delusional, or someone who's just denying the facts, just broadly. Now, in this context, you said that given what you're aware of, if you're going to take a stance of agnosticism, Archie, and you're going to be also saying that you have good reason for being agnostic on the proposition, then fundamentally, you'd have to be saying that given all the things you are aware of, none of those informational data pieces is evidence for God existing, and so you are agnostic on the proposition because given what you're aware of, nothing that you are cognizant of would favor the proposition. Now, one of the things that you're cognizant of, which you're aware of, is the Bayesian fine-tuning argument. I'm not sure how much you understand the argument. I don't think there's that much things you understand properly because you're limited cognitive faculty, but let's just assume you have a good understanding of this argument, given my expectation previously. So with respect to that argument, insofar as it compares the conditional probability of God existing, given life existent conditions, and I repeat, given life existent conditions, it would be the case that such probability is higher than the atheistic hypothesis. Which position would you hold with respect to that? You told me that you just don't see that to be good evidence insofar as there are people who don't agree with that to be good evidence. But that's not really answering my question because, my question is not about what other people view to be good evidence. I'm talking about given your awareness of the argument, why would that not be good evidence? because that's an implicit claim you're be making here. Because what you're going to be saying here, if you're going to be agnostic of the proposition, you'd have to be saying that all the things you're aware of does not favor the proposition or the negation, and that's what makes you agnostic of the proposition. And we know for a fact that one of these things would be the Bayesian fine-tuning argument, right? So unless you can demonstrate to me that the Bayesian fine-tuning argument would not be evidence for the proposition that God exists, it does not raise the probability of God existing, given what I mean by evidence in this context, in the probabilistic sense, in epistemology, unless you can demonstrate that. If you cannot demonstrate this, then what we can firmly conclude, given your ignorance, your blunders, your retardation, and the fact of your inability to try the basic points, you don't have good motivation or justification, being agnostic on the problem. And then afterwards, we can get on to my argument, why God definitely exists without a reason of doubt. Now I can give a response.
Yeah, it's like I'm trying to like correct the you like it's really hard. I mean, yeah, maybe so a bunch of Quark Apollo screenshots and chat. He got just super angry one day, right? Just follow me, stay with me, right? And then he randomly decided to pull out a gun, jump through my window, and shoot me dead, right? Let's imagine that whole situation played out. You're just really, really angry one day. Well, at that point, it would seem as though I can't defend any kind of counter argument. It would seem as though I can't give any kind of point against you, right? Does that suddenly mean that your point is correct? Wait, no? Oh, well, that just simply means that irrespective of whether I can produce a counter argument, obviously you would need some kind of further reason, right, in order for you to justify why God exists. If you're attempting to use the Bayesian inference or some kind of like Bayesian argument, like in this one, you picked out fine tuning. Well, you have to defend fine tuning. You have to explain why from fine tuning we get to God, right? I don't know if like this passed your head or flew over you while you're like typing to ChatGPT, you know, what kind of responses you should be trying to generate at the moment. But obviously, if I'm the one trying to tell you that you have to explain to me why fine tuning actually leads to God, just given the consideration that even in philosophy, it's actually not even something that's super uncontroversial, right? It's actually something that's really controversial, right? A lot of people actually would like to think that fine tuning doesn't even lead to God, right? So I'm saying, like, just past this whole finding stuff, why exactly is this good reason to believe in God? Now, if you want to say that I need to produce some kind of counter argument because I made an implicit claim that this isn't good evidence, what I told you is that I have no good reason to believe that there's good evidence for it. Or what I told you is that I haven't been presented with such a thing. Now, if you want to present me with this good reason, if you want to present me with this kind of argument, then sure. If you want to acquaint me with these facts, sure, right? But if not, we're not going to get anywhere, right? I'll even give you like a little another intuition pump. So let's imagine this. Let's imagine randomly we're in a desert, right? You have like a grilled cheese on the floor that's just been bitten, right? And then, you know, let's imagine you don't have some kind of constructed explanation for how the grilled cheese got there. So I explain to you, Apollo, I say, well, you know, I'm thinking that it was like Rizhan dairy, you know, desert cheese fairies. I think I want to make a Rizhan desert cheese fairies that flew in. You know, he got extremely hungry. He's extremely fat. So, you know, he decided to grab it and just took a bite out of it and dropped it there. Let's imagine you had no further counter explanation against that. Right. That doesn't now immediately levy me good reason to believe, or levy you good reason to believe in my hypothesis because you don't have a good counter argument. No. I still need to explain exactly what's the reason, right? I still need to justify it. I still need to conform reasoning in which you can be acquainted with this reason and in which you can believe, Apollo. Okay, so let's try to drag this back to the debate. If you're asking me for some kind of counter argument, right, or you're asking me to justify my agnosticism, in which I'm already trying to explain to you that, well, saying you're agnostic isn't like affirming a proposition. In fact, you're just holding like epistemic restraints towards the proposition. I know no further how to help you, right? But just to be clear, these are the 3 points you should be considering and responding to, right? Just to get you on your tracking horse. 1, right? Even if I were to not be here, presumably you would still need good reason to believe, right, in the proposition, and you would still need good reason to connect fine tuning to God's existence. 2, right, presumably, right, it's very controversial in philosophy of whether fine tuning actually leads to God. So presumably, even if one were to version of the fine tuning hypothesis, you yourself would have to implement theism into there, and you yourself would have to explain why this turns out to be more conditionally probable, you know, considering theism compared to considering atheism. And then 3, right, the point you should really be focusing on is the fact that when people say that they just simply are agnostic, that they have no good reason to believe in a given proposition, that's not to say that they're affirming the negation of it, right? Which in that instance would leave them good reason to actually deny that proposition or whatever, right? Right. Rather, we're just holding some kind of position of agnosticism onto it. Okay. So those are the 3 points you should be addressing. I hope that's like very, very clear for you.
Alrighty, so a whole bunch of points, and none of those actually respond to my actual arguments here. So no one has ever made the claim of this conversation, Archi, that you taking the stance of agnosticism gives you this sort of responsibility, this probative responsibility or burden to actually prove the claim that God does not exist. I'm not making that claim. I'm telling you here that when someone says that, when the average person, whether philosophically or in layman conversations, when they're saying that they're agnostic on the given claim, what they're saying there is, given all the things that they're aware of currently, none of those things points in favor of that proposition to make them motivated and believe in that proposition. Now, what that would be directly stating, or rather implicitly stating, is that if one is to be aware of an argument, like the Bayesian fine-tuning arguments, right, and they still make the claim that they are agnostic on the proposition that God exists with respect to their belief system, they're agnostic on the proposition, what they would be saying there implicitly, given the epistemic entailments of agnosticism, given the conventional sense, is that it is the case that that specific argument does not work, and that's why they're not going to believe in the conclusion of that argument. And that's why they're still agnostic on whether or not God exists or whether God does not exist. Now, what you originally said in this conversation, with the beginning part of this conversation, which is why I asked you this question, was simple. Me asking you, do you believe that you're justified in being agnostic? What you said was, by agnostic, when you say you're agnostic on the proposition, you don't think there's good evidence favoring the proposition of God exists, right? Nor is there good evidence favoring God does not exist. You're not making the claim on whether or not God exists, whether God does not exist. That's your position, right? You're saying that you don't believe that there's good evidence favoring the proposition that God exists. Now, for it to be making that belief claim, then that means that within your data set, within your knowledge system, all the available data pieces is something you believe is not good evidence for God existing, right? Now, of course, that belief requires justification. And so when I ask you, what about this data piece in your knowledge system, which is the Bayesian fine-tuning argument? Why would that not be good evidence for God existing? You're saying you just don't see, I just don't see it to be good evidence. That's not an argument as to why there's not good evidence. That's a presupposition that you're making, since you're making the claim here that you're agnostic in virtue of not thinking that there's good evidence favoring the proposition of God existing. Now, you can change the stance of agnosticism from a strong agnostic position to a weak agnostic position, which you don't know the distinction between because you're retarded, right? You're a shitter, right? So a strong agnostic position is what you're maintaining originally when you're making the claim that it is the case that you don't think there's good evidence favoring God exists. Now you're changing the position to you don't see any good reasons to believe in the God exists, which is a weaker version of this epistemic attitude, which then is going to force you to give an argument. But the first position you've given, which is a strong agnostic position, requires a particular argument if you were to be aware of these cosmological arguments, right, which you don't believe, or these fine-tuning arguments, rather, which you don't take to be good evidence. So now that I've basically clarified the strawmans and the distortions and the misrepresentations of my point here with respect to you believing in burden shifting, which is not the case if you actually have any good tracking skill, I'm going to give the argument for why God exists, since I've already clarified the distinction. So the argument for why God exists is just going to be something which is predicated on some meta-ontological entailments, right? So we know for a fact that things such as imaginations exist, beliefs exist. These things are things we possess. We have beliefs, we have imaginations. These things are things which actually exist. Not objectively, but they exist nonetheless. Right? I'm saying that God exists objectively, by the way. I'm not going to be saying that God exists as a mere imagination. I'm not going to be pulling that argument. However, I'm going to be telling you, I'm going to be starting off from these premises, like, for example, that there are mental stuff which exist, like, for example, beliefs, imaginations, all of these stuff. These things actually exist, by the way. Irrespective of their lack of mind-independent nature, they still exist regardless. The conclusion of the argument is that God exists objectively. So I'm going to start off with that premise and ask you if you agree to disagree with that premise with respect to whether or not it is the case that beliefs and imaginations exist. Like, do we have imaginations and beliefs as people, for example? Yes or no?
I don't really know what all that blunder was, but I'll like respond to like a few of it because most of it I've kind of already responded to, and we don't really need to rehash it. But yeah, as far as like you like almost distinguishing like strong agnosticism from weak agnosticism, I actually never committed to either or. I never clarified that, so I'm not really too sure where you're drawing the line in that or what camp you're establishing me into that because I didn't make claims on that. As far as your second most, I guess, main prevalent point goes in like claiming, I guess, imaginations, things like that actually exist. I'm not really too sure why anyone would endorse a view like that. So maybe you'd have to like provide some motivation behind that. And it sounded like you gave an inference in which that was one of the conclusions, or sorry, an inference in which that was one of the premises, and it like entailed the conclusion God exists. Maybe you're gonna have to give it to me again, because the way I tracked this argument, it just wasn't valid. I'm not really too sure what that was supposed to be. If that was like a version of the fine-tuning argument, I'm not really too sure what like fake Routledge philosophy encyclopedia you got that from. But yeah, maybe I misheard it though. Yeah, I don't really know what you're saying there. And like as far as like this whole like agnosticism thing, like implicit evidence thing, I don't know. You just kind of have to like get over this hill. I've been like trying to help you past it, but you just really haven't gotten past it. I mean, the main idea is just really this. So like when someone claims that they're agnostic towards a given proposition, right? That's not to say that they believe there's good reason to believe in its negation, right? That's just to say they don't see a good reason to believe in either or, right? Saying you don't see a reason is not to say there isn't any good reason, that there's a lack of good reason. You know, there may be some kind of good reason that's actually, you know, out there. And, you know, maybe you just don't have the acquainted facts, right, needed for you to actually apprehend that good reason, right? That could be a very fine possibility in which maybe then, right, would be consistent with me being agnostic. And maybe that's like a good intuition pump for the fact that you don't need to justify agnosticism or justify why an argument isn't good in case you don't see a good reason to believe in it. But yeah, like generally when people like offer up arguments or offer up like propositions that they feel there's good motivation to like be believed, generally what we're expecting is like motivation behind that, right? Just simply because someone doesn't accept it, that's not to say that they're rejecting it, right? Like, I'll actually give a bit of an example. So like, I know like you personally out of everyone in the server relate to this. It's like when you tried going into Apple's DMs on TikTok, right? Like when you tried like making sexual advances, she said like she just didn't, she felt like really, really uncomfortable with it. Like saying that, like just because she said she didn't want yours, that's not to say she doesn't like any kind of sexual advance. That's not to say she's saying she hates it. She's just saying she doesn't want it and she wants her space respected, right? Similarly to that, right? Very natural. She doesn't hate you or anything like that. She just wants it respected and she just wants you to fuck off, right? Similarly, in this situation, I'll like bring it back to the debate. Mainly, right, when I'm like saying I want motivation behind that, that's not me saying there's no motivation, right? That's not me saying you have no good reason. That's just to simply say I'm expecting good reason from you. Okay, so now that we've gone past that, do you have a response?
Yeah, the response is pretty simple, right? So he did not even address the bare fact that he changed his position. Originally, this is on the record, we can roll back the clip later on. What he did in fact say is that I don't think there are good reasons or there's good evidence favoring God existing. Just like how, for example, as a theistic person, you'd be saying, I think God exists, and you'd be justifying why your thought is correct or accurate. He says, I think that, or I don't think that there's good reasons favoring God existing. He disbelieves that there's good reason or evidence favoring God existing. Of course, I've already went over this numerous different times, but this has sadly not been registering through his thick skull, by the way. But what I've been telling him the entire time is simply that when you're going to be making these claims, for example, like given your current data set, there's no evidence for God existing, which is entailed from your agnostic position, by the way, your strong agnostic position. Of course, that's going to require justification. That's going to require propositional justification. That's going to be a proposition. You're saying, given your data set, there's no good evidence for God existing. That's a proposition, you dumb fuck. So, of course, when we investigate and evaluate and assess your data set, one of these things considering are being the Bayesian fine-tuning argument, and then you're unable to prove to me that the Bayesian fine-tuning argument does not raise the probability of God existing, then the initial position you adopted, which is a strong agnostic position, when you are making the implicit claim that given your data set, there's no good evidence for God existing, that was incorrect. That was false and also unsubstantiated, you dumb lucky victim. So moving on from that, now you're changing the position of the dumb fuck you actually are, like the pussy you actually are. You're changing the position from a strong agnostic position to a weak agnostic position. Of course, you and the audience will not understand this for the main part because just like the audience, just for the majority of the audience, you're also severely intellectually bankrupt to understand the basic distinction between strong agnosticism, which entails propositions or beliefs, and the weak agnosticism, which does not entail such. So the strong agnostic position, which you've been mentioning the entire time, before you changed the position, that position requires a particular proposition which you have not presented evidence for. So I'm going to just dismiss that for now. So now we have a new position for Archi, since the first one got demolished and pissed on. The new position is a weak agnostic position, which is barely to say that I don't see any reasons as to why God exists, which is not to say that given your current data set, there's no evidence for God existing, but it's just to say that you don't see any reason why God exists, which is a weaker version of the agnostic position. I had to repeat this numerous different times, but it's Archimedes we're dealing with here, so Rita we're dealing with, so it's going to be expected that I would have to be repeating myself because you're repeatedly not tracking, and you're repeatedly strawmanning, and repeatedly not addressing the fucking point on the table. Now, so the argument for why God exists, since you're unable to give the justification for the claim that was entailed from your position because you're dumb, right? So the argument for why God exists would simply be the bare fact that given the conditions which are entailed from what it means for something to exist, God exists because God could not exist as a fictional object. For anything else, it either exists as a fictional object or as a non-fictional object. It's a mind-independent object. That's a true dichotomy. Now, with that being said, if God was to exist as a mind-dependent object, given my definition, which is the conventional definition of God, which is, by the way, an omnipotent, omniscient creator of the universe, given that definition of God, it would in fact be the case that there's a logical contradiction entailed from God existing as a mind-dependent object. Now, we use a thing in prop logic, by the way, in inference rule, which you're not fully aware of because you're retarded and you're ignorant. It's called disjunctive elimination. So you start off with introducing the disjunction, and then afterwards, you use disjunctive elimination to establish the truth value of one of the disjunctive, the particular disjunctive statements. So the initial disjunction is simply God either exists as a fictional object or as a non-fictional object. If God exists as a fictional object, then there's a logical contradiction. If there's a logical contradiction in God existing as a fictional object, then it would be the case that him existing as a fictional object is false. So that means not P, or P is not true. And if P is not true, that's going to entail that not P is true, because P not being true and not P being true are analytically identical. They're semantically and logically equivalent, right? So that would trivially entail that God exists objectively, and therefore God exists because of the logical contradiction. You're going to want to ask me, Apollo, what's the logical contradiction in God existing as a fictional object or as an imagination? The logical contradiction being that if God was to exist as a fictional or as an imaginary object, then it would be the case that God is mind-dependent, because all imaginations, by definition, are mind-dependent. Now, God is omnipotent. That means he has maximal causal power, right? If you have maximal causal power, you have to be the first cause in the causal chain, because if you're not the first cause of the causal chain, then that would indicate that you're dependent on something else, and that thing would have more causal power and more causal efficacy in the causal chain in comparison to you. So maximal causal power, which is what omnipotence actually is, would trivially entail that God is the first cause. And if God is the first cause, then God cannot be mind-dependent, because if God is mind-dependent, that means he's dependent on minds, and so that means he's caused by minds, which contradicts God being the first cause. Dumb fuck. So trivially it entails that God cannot be a fictional object given the clear and conspicuous contradiction I've laid out in him being imaginary. And so that would entail, beyond a reasonable doubt, that God exists as a non-fictional object, and therefore God exists objectively, independently of minds. And so the proposition and the burden would be fulfilled. Now, what other dumb fuck responses do you have to mention in this conversation before I lose even more brain cells, retard?
I mean, I think I got to commend you. You recognize you're doing really, really bad on the fine-tuning point. You realize that just wasn't really your shine. So you moved on to an even worse argument given to you by your daddy, Arianis, which I recognize from his survey that he sent. So I got to commend you. You typically don't do that in debates. So I got to commend you. So we're going to send this in the chat so everyone can track your dog shit argument, right? And then we're going to go step by step explaining why this is a really, really poor argument, so that, potential theists in the chat that are, looking to engage in good faith conversation do not use this, Okay. So let's just let's just kind of like walk through this a little bit, right? Just ignore Shinra because I'm not Jewish, I think. Okay, so the main idea is like really this. So it seems like you want to say like bare facts given the condition for what it means to exist. Something involved with that basically means God cannot exist like as a fictional object. And you want to like maybe implement some kind of disjunction saying that he either exists as a fictional object or he doesn't. I'm not really too sure what bare facts you're talking about. You kind of like blitzed over that. But yeah, so just already off the jump, I have no reason to believe that. But then you like offer like some kind of like conditional. You basically say that, if it seems as though, he exists mind dependently, just given iteration of God, just the normal version of God, there would seem to be some kind of logical contradiction with God being mind dependent. That's kind of a weird jump. Okay, maybe associating existing with existing mind dependently. I'm not really too sure. That was never really cashed out in your argument, but let's just assume you are. Right. Okay. So you want to say that you're using a disjunctive elimination. You're saying he either exists fictionally or not. Him existing fictionally entails some kind of contradiction. That's strange. A logical contradiction. Okay. Well, let's see what the logical contradiction is. Okay. So, so you're saying that if he were to exist, I don't know, fictionally, in this case, he would simply be mind dependent, right? Whatever that means. And if God is omnipotent, right? If you have maximal causal power, you must be the first cause. Well, let's go over omnipotence for a second. So how omnipotence is used traditionally is just to say that, you have the power to maybe instantiate every logically possible case that tends to be consistent with the very agent's, basically just with the very agent's existence. If that's what you mean by omnipotence, that actually doesn't entail you being some kind of first cause, right? But if you're like using omnipotence in a very strange way, particular way, in which you're just simply saying, yeah, that just means he's like, he seems to be the origin of the nexus of causal reality that we simply see being displayed in our reality. I would just like accuse you of begging the question, because presumably for God to be omnipotent or for him to have any kind of thing like that, at least if you're like maybe predicating him has some kind of actual existing entity, presumably this would just simply mean that he would already have to exist, because it must be logically prior for him to be true of any kind of given thing that he exists, right? So if we take that, right, if that's uncontroversial between us, it would simply mean that you actually already be containing his existence within the given premise, right? Presumably would mean that you're just begging the question. Now, the charitable version of what you're doing is you might just simply be giving some kind of definition. Like you're just saying, well, maybe like if I define God as this way, it would simply entail some kind of contradiction, because, I mean, if God is omnipotent in such a way, obviously he can't be mind dependent. Well, I take it that we can predicate over fictional items and quantify over fictional items in a sense in which, this predication doesn't turn out to be veridical. So like, let's imagine there's no actual reference, in reality. I take it that you can predicate meaningfully, right, without actually claiming this predication is vertical, as in there's an actual referent that it corresponds to. Under this reading, I have no actual reason to believe that he exists given these conventions, right? And it actually would turn out that it's completely consistent with him being mind dependent, which is, and actually we'll get into that language as well. So if what you mean is mind dependent is that he exists, but his existence is like dependent on our minds, well, that's already begging the question, right? Because I just don't take it he exists at all. I don't really know what it means to exist in the mind. So maybe you'd have to cash that out in that way. But if that's not what you meant, if you weren't begging the question and making that really shitty mistake, what you were actually intending to say is just that it turns out that he's just some kind of object or agent we can conceptualize of in such a sense. I mean, even that would be a little contestable. But yeah, if that's what you mean, then yeah, like I would just read that over like fictional predication. Yeah, what's your response?
Yeah, to say that's an argument is question begging is to basically point out that the conclusion is contained within any of the premises. And none of the premises of the argument is the conclusion identical or contained within it. It's just entailed from the premises. So that's a non-point. That was a blunder. Okay, so when we talk about existence, primarily, existence is going to be something which applies to things even like minds, for example, imaginations, beliefs, because we possess these things. Now, you made the claim for some reason that you don't grant it to be the case, or rather, you don't even understand what it means for something to be mind-dependent, which is really hilarious. I'm pretty sure any person with any rudimentary level understanding of basic philosophy and full of mind and metaphysics would actually understand this very simple concept. So what it means for something to be mind-dependent is for it to be the type of thing which cannot be instantiated without mind's existence. So there's an asymmetric dependence relation, if you know what it is about. Insofar as these things could not exist without mind's existence. However, minds could exist without these things existing. One example is Santa Claus. Santa Claus is fictional. He's an imagination, the mind. He exists as a mere imagination. Santa Claus could have not existed without us thinking about him as a concept, because he's just a mere concept. He does not actually exist in the extramental world, unless you're delusional enough to believe it. It's just like how you're delusional enough to believe you're rhetorically winning this conversation for some reason. Now, to get back to the actual point here, now that I've explicated, semantically speaking, as to what it means for something to be mind-dependent, right? In the case of God, I'm telling you here that the contradiction is pretty obvious from the omnipotence part. However, you rejected the definition. You're like, oh, you believe that maximal causal power is something which is a proprietary definition, and given the conventional definition of omnipotence, which is to say that God is able to actualize all things which are logically possible, then it would be the case that God does not have this sort of characteristic of necessarily being mindful. Now that's false, right? If you actually did any research, by the way, you know that the majority of theistic versions, especially classical theism, would trivially entail logical necessitarianism or metaphysical necessitarianism. And given that position, it would be the case that if God has maximal causal power, under this view where he's the first cause, then it is logically necessarily true that God would in fact be able to actualize all logically possible state of affairs. Because we have only one chain of logical possibilities, and God will be the first cause of all of these logical possibilities, which are also actualities, right? So I'm a logical necessitarian. I can give you the evidence for logical necessitarianism. Logical necessitarianism basically follows from the Peter van Huygens modal providential collapse, which establishes that if you were to in fact have a first cause, i.e. God, for example, under a Neoplatonic framework, whereas God is ontologically dependent and you're going on this account of causation, right? Then it would be the case that either God is the only thing which creates the universe or is the cause for creation, which entails creation being necessary alongside God, or it is the case he's not the sufficient condition of creation, which entails that God does not have sufficient causal power for creating the universe, and so that would entail that God is not ontological. Now, that specific modal collapse, the modal providential collapse, entails or is evidence for logical necessitarianism, and given logical necessitarianism, it would be the case that God, that I'm talking about in this conversation, if he was to be omnipotent, that means he has maximal causal power, then it would also be the case he's able to actualize all logical possibilities, because this world contains all logical possibilities, right? Whether it's in the future, or in the past, or in the current time. And he's the cause of all of those things. So you're incorrect when you're going to be making the claim that my concept of omnipotence falls out of alignment with actualizing all logical possibilities. In fact, my concept of omnipotence, if you understand the point, which you have not been the entire time, have not been understanding any single point of this conversation, it would in fact entail that it would be the case that he's able to actualize all logical possibilities. So that was a blunder again. That was like perhaps the 8th blunder from the downfall. Now to move on to the other part. Now, you have not even addressed the logical contradiction of established given the concept of omnipotence. You have not addressed the bare fact of it being the case that given this disjunctive introduction and disjunctive elimination, it would trivially be the case, or not trivially, but rather it would necessarily be the case that God exists objectively, because you don't even understand what's even going on here. The argument is not to define God into existence, but rather is to use the semantical conditions of God alongside a meta-ontology to establish the conclusion be true. So for the argument to be question begging, for you to be making the claim that I'm defining God into existence and it is question begging, it has to be the case that the argument and the conclusion of the argument is epistemically warranted only in virtue of a mere definition. It's not only in virtue of a mere definition, but it's epistemically justified in virtue of a definition of God, lays out the conditions, which is what an ontological argument actually is, in conjunct with our meta-ontology, what the factual meta-ontological theory actually is, which you don't know what meta-ontology is, right? So given the main theory, which is invented by Scott in the 1970s, this is a meta-ontological theory, which is, there's the most evidence favors this meta-ontological theory, basically. But it defines existence based off its distinction from non-information in the given domain. Given that theory, it's logically necessarily true that God exists. And we can provide evidence for it being the case that this concept of meta-ontology, this meta-ontological theory is correct. Given the available evidence, given the semantical intuitions, it's strong evidence for the point. Right, so I'm going to wait until we actually address the argument and stop giving this sort of like non-point gibberish ranting session where you don't actually address anything and try to rhetorically posture in front of a likely audience thinking that you're actually winning the conversation.
I mean, a whole lot of blunders, a whole lot of errors. So, I mean, as far as like that whole second point went into, as far as you trying to like justify the definition of omnipotence, I'm not really too sure what that whole like yamp was about. I mean, well, like one, like it just isn't the case that most theists or like necessitarians or even like endorse a view like that. Two, I was actually interpreting a little bit of a more charitable version of your argument. So yeah, if what it turns out in chat your argument actually is, which I mean you can correct it if you're wrong, you're just saying like non-monoganism is true, like for any x, x exists in virtue of the mind or not in virtue of the mind. It seems like God refers to some kind of thing that basically God is a thing in which could exist either in virtue of the mind or not exist in virtue of the mind. God existing in virtue, of the mind, which means he's like causally limited, but definitionally he can't be, so therefore God exists. I mean, this is like kind of bad. So like one, I'm not even too sure why I'd accept P1. So I mean, that of it in itself is already really controversial. I'm not too sure if I even take God to be a thing. It would just like kind of depend on what you understand a thing to be. And I've already like addressed the logical contradiction thing. Like I already told you, just it just simply wouldn't turn out to be logically contradictory under like a fictional reading of predication. So yeah, it's like generally the response. Like it just didn't take like 5 minutes to get out. You kind of like gibberated for that.
Yeah, so maybe I could have spent more time responding because then actually all the points I mentioned and not a single point, which was even a bad response, by the way. The justification for non-mind non-organism being true is pretty simple. So, given the very fact that so that which we think of, by the way, anything we think of is a thought, either relatively or absolutely, by the way. So, if I think of something, like let's say I think of Archi, right? It could be the case that Archi exists as a mere thought, or it could exist as something which is outside of a thought. Or even Santa Claus. Santa Claus exists as a fictional object, or as an imagination, or as a thought. Things which we think of, by definition, would be a thought, would be something which is identical to a thought in some sense, or imagination, whatever it is, right? So given that in the perspective, right, a thought would have either semantical conditions or conceptual conditions. That means it is either something which has a given definition, you can give a definition for that given concept, or the reference of that concept, which would mean that it is not a semantic primitive, or you don't have a definition of such, which would entail that you just merely have a conceptual representation of such thing, which indicates that it is the case that it is a semantic primitive, however, it's still conceptual. Right? After all, semantics by its own nature is reflective of what you mean by a given word, which, by the way, indicates that you have a concept that you're implementing in linguistic discourses when utilizing that given word. Now, with that being stated in perspective, it would be the case that, trivially speaking, if I'm thinking of something, then it is either a thought or something which is not just merely a thought. Now, if it is a thought, then it would be the case that it exists, obviously, right? Because all thoughts exist. We have thoughts, retard. So it would mean that this would exist, but not objectively. If it does not exist as a thought, right, and it's something which is not a mere thought, and it has conceptual conditions, then that means it exists independently of thought. So think of, for example, let's say Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump, I can think about Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is not just merely a thought. He exists independently of thought. How we can verify this is by the very fact that we know, for example, that Donald Trump exists independently of whether or not I think about it. And then from there on, I can then say that given that fact into perspective, then we can establish that because Donald Trump is a meaningful thing, that means there are conceptual conditions or facts which satisfies the condition of being Donald Trump, and he's not a mere thought, then that means given the fact that these set of facts exist which satisfies this Donald Trump-like object, then clearly Donald Trump would exist objectively. Very obvious fact, but you're not understanding anything in this conversation. So non-mind non-organism would be true given the establishment of what the thought actually is, and given how we conceptually assess existence, and now it would be the case that there's a true dichotomy between thoughts and non-thoughts, and the latter conjunct, I should say, would be something which indicates that it would exist mind independently. So premise one has been justified. What's your objection to premise one? Or which words do I have to clarify for you for your retard brain to understand? Tell me.
Well, I mean, you just didn't justify premise one, to be clear. I don't really know why you thought that was a justification, but yeah, we'll explain a few issues with what you're doing. So like I've already explained to you, right? Obviously, under non-monogism, like if you to refer to something literally just means that it exists, right? So when you say like the term God, like basically when you say the term God refers, that could be a thing. I don't really just see how that's any different from just simply saying he exists. And under a view like yours, in which you're just simply saying justify this because it just seems I mean, yeah, I don't even think you justified that view in premise one. What it sounded like what you were doing is explaining why, it seems like we can think of God, and it turns out that our thoughts are things. So if we can think of God, and it just turns out God is a thing. That sounds like the kind of like argument you were trying to talk about. And in a view like mine, well, I don't really see why our thoughts really have to be things in the sense you're using it, right? Like to me, it turns out that like when we have thoughts and when we think of something, it turns out that there's generally like content that's being apprehended, like concepts that are being apprehended. And I mean, I'm not really too sure what you mean by existence, but if what you mean by existence is that it just turns out that it can correspond to some domain of like reality, I mean, I just don't take it that that's the case when it comes to like certain contents or thoughts or whatever. Like I don't really know what exactly you mean under a view like that. I mean, there's a few different issues with what you're saying. Also, I don't really understand like this whole like dichotomy thing. Like it sounds like you're saying like for any X, like X exists in virtue of a mind or not. To me, it just sounds like you're like just demanding like some kind of clean split between like mind dependence and I guess independence. I don't really see why I'd endorse a view like that either way. That also kind of seems a bit strange to me, but yeah, even with that argument, I'm not really too sure why you got that off. I'm not even too sure if you responded to the circular point. It kind of seemed like you rushed towards that. Like, is it okay if you can respond to that?
Definitely. Give me a second look.
Yeah, take your time.
Okay, just to respond to the arguments, right? So, or the points you've mentioned rather. There are plenty of things you're not really seeing, which is kind of like concerning to be honest. But I'll just clarify the things and be good faith. Okay, so the first point you're skeptical of is, of course, non-mind non-organism. Like, why is it the case that you're asking me why, Paul, is it the case that things are there no non-existent things? There are no such thing as things that are non-existent. Right? Now, the thing is, when you say correspond to reality, it seems to be the case you're invoking some external world concept of what reality is, which is not something which is philosophically intuitive for this reason. So everyone grants that it is the case, it is possible that reality is a mere projection of the mind, at least intuitively. This is just something which people grant, like solipsism or idealism. They'll grant this. And under an idealist hypothesis or a solipsist hypothesis, it would be the case that it is the case that reality is a projection of the mind or it's identical to mental stuff, basically. Right? That's basically it. It's mind dependent. However, it is not the case that it is compatible with any of these hypotheses that there exists a mind independent reality. But of course, people grant this possibility. So the very fact that people grant this possibility indicates that reality should not be defined in virtue of just being mind independent, but it also should accommodate the mind dependence for it to actually accommodate our logical intuitions with respect to the possibility of something which is reality, by the way, being mind dependent, right? Existing as a mind dependent object. So reality, in that sense, I'm not sure what you mean there when you're talking about corresponding to reality there. But when I say reality, I'm just talking about that which is distinct from non-information. And how we determine information from non-information, according to, like, for example, Scott, for example, in mathematics and computer science or computational theory, is by basically establishing whether or not there are certain conceptual or you could say semantical conditions which can utilize to create a domain by which you can quantify over the given object. That's the most consistent meta-ontological position, given the logical intuitions we have about what is logically possible with respect to reality, and given the semantic intuitions we have with respect to how we use the word exist. With that being said, the case of God, right, when I'm saying that God cannot exist as a thought, right, I'm telling you that with respect to that, the reason why that's true is only because there's a logical contradiction. You weren't fully understanding why there's a logical contradiction. So you can put that point on postponement for now because you're being skeptical towards a new point, which is simply the relation of the dichotomy. Right, the dichotomy there is going to be established given the fact, as I've said previously, once you think of something, you're having a thought. And if you're having a thought, then clearly it is the case that whatever that thought is something, it's not begging the question. You don't know what you're talking about. Please stop using words you don't even understand. It's embarrassing. Well, you're interrupting again. You're interrupting. What's going on? That's how we're doing talking today. He's scared. He's panicking. Oh, look at you interrupting because you know for a fact you're getting destroyed right now.
No, I'm just
Where's
saying
the moderation, guys? Then why are you interrupting, Archie? Are you intimidated by the points you're making right now?
I don't know why you said that.
I don't know why you're interrupting. I don't know you're spragging right now. I don't know why you're spragging right now. You're interrupting. Is there a talking sticker? No, we can do this.
This is like the most alien
look at him, the fake class. He thinks the fake class is going to mask his real anger. Oh, shit. So where's the moderation? I thought there's moderation, like a talking stick, because you cried for moderation originally.
All I did was ask for you to justify
All he
the
did was
conclusion that
interrupted
those
my
things are
points by
things.
saying I was question begging. That was not just asking the question,
I
it was
just
a claim, by the
explained
way.
to
What
you
are you
why it
talking
is
about?
question begging. Like that
You would give
very
a
sentence
trash
is the thing you're
explanation, of
supposed
course.
to be
I agree, give an
justifying.
explanation. It was dog shit. It was a dog shit explanation. I agree with you. So,
I don't know
anyways,
what
now
you're
that you've
talking
given that
about.
blunder, I don't know why you
Oh, let's
keep
let
on
them box.
interrupting
All
me
right, man.
again.
So yeah,
Oh, look at the
basically,
guy.
right?
He's
The main
panicking.
idea is
Oh,
like
yikes.
obviously under a
Oh,
view like
yikes. He
yours,
scared me to finish my
right?
argument
It
because
just
he
doesn't
knows
make
he's not
sense to say
second.
that they're
And you're
things, right?
stumbling right now. What's
Obviously, if
going
we're
on,
questioning
Archie?
whether God is a
Nothing
very
makes
thing in
sense to you,
itself,
Archie. You're
you're just
retarded.
being
We
very, very
understand.
stupid, right?
Nothing
Like
makes sense to you, Archie. This is not something which is
non-monogism
unbelievable
is
or
if
surprising.
it is happens to
So
be
to get
true,
back to
that
the
just
point, he's
means
still interrupting.
everything
He's actually
either exists
scared
in
for me to
virtue of the
finish the
mind or
point.
not, right? And
Yeah,
obviously, if
so
God
did he
refers,
demonstrate the
which is just
argument
to
as to
say
why this
under a
plus
given
and begging
semantics,
retard?
where reference presupposes the
He's
given
rambling. He's
existence, right?
rambling. He's
Obviously, if
rambling.
that's
He's
the
not even
case, if
addressing
God
the question.
existed in virtue of the
He
mind,
doesn't know what's
right?
going on.
Presumably, you might want to say that he'd be
Oh
limited,
shit!
right?
Are you gonna
You might want
deliver
to say
the
he's not,
argument?
but
Or are you gonna
obviously
even
that's just question
pontificate on
begging,
the
right?
basis of the
Because I'm
asseveration?
not even someone who
What's the
accepts
argument,
that to
Archie?
begin with, right? Not only
More
just that, but I'm
claims.
not even too sure if
Waiting
this
for
is
the
going to be
answer.
something that guides of our intuitions, like
Waiting
this
for
whole
the answer, Lotier. What's the
non-monogism
answer?
thing you're referring to.
What's the argument,
Like under a
Archie?
view like mine, that doesn't seem
Waiting for the
intuitive
answer,
that those are
Lotier.
the kinds of like
That's the
things that we
third
use in virtue of
deflection from the
reality.
Lotier.
It doesn't seem
Maybe in the
intuitive that
fourth
that's all
try,
the
he's gonna give
things.
an argument.
It just seems very,
What
very
is the
strange.
argument for the
So
question against
if you have
proposition?
some kind of thing, you can like
That's the
maybe
fourth
justify that.
deflection from the Lotier.
Are
Maybe in
you
the fifth try, I'll give an
stupid?
argument.
Wait, are you mentally ill?
Are you stupid? Or are you going to
Why
deliver
is
an
this guy
argument, you
stuttering
retard?
over himself?
Are you going to deliver an argument? I'm mocking
This
your
guy's like
stutter,
really,
retard. What
really
are you
retarded.
talking about? He can't even track the bare
This
facts. I'm
guy's
mocking
mind
his
is like
studies. This is
absolutely
embarrassing.
lost.
Are you going to
Do you want to
deliver the
respond to
argument that
any
was
point that I've made?
Boston Archie?
Do you
He's
want to
not delivering
respond to
the
like
argument.
any point that I've made?
That's the other dodge.
You have like the freedom
What's
to
the
respond
argument?
to any of the points I've made, by the
Waiting
way.
for the answer. What's the
This is
argument?
like completely on you.
Waiting for the answer. That's the eighth deflection. When is he going to give an argument?
Is this guy retarded?
Is this your attempt to dodge my question? Of course.
Oh,
it
I
is.
am.
Give an
I
argument,
got you.
Archie. Okay,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
just pause for a second. So, anyways,
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? I'm talking about
I've
you not
like
giving an
do
argument
you
right now.
understand the
You're
response that's being
lost in the
communicated to you?
conversation. You're stumbling over your words. That's
Do
trying to
you
criticize the
understand the
legislation.
response that's
Do
being
you
communicated
understand
to
not
you,
giving
Paulo?
an argument? Do you understand the distinction between giving an argument and
Do you
dodging a question?
understand the
retard?
distinction between burden
Oh, that's
shifting and
another dodge. You
justifying
won't
your
even
claims?
answer the
Do you
question. If
understand
you
the difference
understand this.
between justifying your
That was
claims?
a yes or no
Do
to
you
my
know
question.
what your
What's the
claims
answer?
are? Do you know what your
That's the
claims
other
are?
distinction.
Do
Of
you know what
course I
your
do. Do
claims
you
are?
know my claims are? Do you
Are
even know
you
what an
stupid?
argument is?
Yeah, you want to say
Are you stupid?
non-monogism
Are you
is true, and I
stupid?
want a
You
reason
think
for
I'm
why.
stupid for me making
You're
the
like being
claim that
really,
I know
really
my claims
autistic.
are? You think I'm
This is
stupid
like
for
really,
making the
really
claim
bad.
that I
Do
know
you
my
normally
claims
act
are?
like
Are you
this?
retarded? If
Do
I
you
made the
normally act like
claim I
this?
know what my claims are, how is that me being stupid, dumbass? What are you talking about? Just pipe down and let me finish my argument. You're interrupted again. He's still going off again. So anyways, why am I getting mad? I'm getting mad. Oh shit, dude. Now it's an emotional therapist session. He shouldn't role play as an emotional therapist instead of playing his role as a debater and giving an actual argument. So what's your argument, Archie? Archie, what's your argument? What's your argument, Archie?
Perfect.
He's
All right.
stunlocked.
Since
He has
we're
no
in
argument. Anyways,
Mars,
to get back to the
since
point.
you wanted to do that,
So,
I
the
guess
point
I'd
is
get out
making
of
is
my
simply
bed. Let me
that,
get my
of course, the
headphones,
logical
Apollo, since you
contradiction
want
is
to get
something which you've not
bullied. Give me a
debunked. I've
second.
established the logical contradiction. I've also established the entailment given Peter Van der Wagens and all the providential collapse that if it was to be the case that
All right.
this is sure, by the way,
I guess
which is
we'll
logicness,
like
determinism,
explain
which
why you're
follows from
wrong
God
on
existence,
PC. Say you're
and God
autistic
doesn't
ass,
fact
can't
exist.
gibber it.
And clearly to be the case,
Okay.
if you're omnipotent,
Well, I mean,
then you're
first
actualizing
off,
all
there's
logical
like a few things we
possibilities.
might want to
So that
acknowledge,
directly
right?
debunks
Like
your
just
claim
for
with
one,
respect
if
to
you
the
hold a
idea of you being
view,
the case
right, into
that
which
my
you just
conceptual
like
assessments
endorse
and evaluation of omnipotence
non-monogism, right?
proprietary.
Under a
So
view
now
like
I'm going to
that,
ask you again, because
obviously it
you
would
made the
be
claim a
very,
while ago
very
that you're running from me,
strange
deflecting from. You
for you to
said
say
that my argument was
God
question begging.
exists,
I'm going
right?
to ask
Well, I
you
mean,
one more
it wouldn't really
time.
be strange, but
Prove
if
the
you're just
claim that
simply
my
saying
argument
that
was
you
question
refer
begging.
to God,
Which
right, in
premise
such
of
a
my
sense,
conclusion
obviously that's just going to be
presupposes the
interpreted as some
conclusion,
kind of like
retard? Tell
question
me.
begging thing. Now I'm not too sure. Wait, first off, can you hear me? By the way, is my mic on PC clear or no?
Oh, you have to go to PC cause he has to go
I just want to be
shit,
clear.
dude. Oh shit, dude.
Like, is my mic working? Okay, perfect.
The
Yeah,
stutter
the
is
main idea is just
embarrassing, dude.
I don't really know why you're like you want to be on so bad. I'm not Quark, right? But the main idea is really this under non-monogism, right? To refer to existence, you fucking dimwit. Okay, Like, obviously, if your premise 3 says the term God refers, which is really what you're trying to say, then by definition, that already means God exists, you fucking dimwit, right? So obviously, right, the conclusion God exists is already baked into premise 3. That's just definitionally fucking dimwit, right? Like, I don't really think he would get
Wait, let him respond.
let us box it out since he went into spam points on I'm like it. Right? The main idea is also this, right? You fucking idiot, right? You fucking little shit. So angry.
because you're trashing the debate.
Wait,
So anyways,
like
we're gonna get back to
non-monotheism.
the moderation.
Obviously, the argument gives us no reason to think that God
look at him,
actually
he's
refers, right?
scared.
So, like, let's imagine, like, you
shit,
like
dude.
replace it with contradiction, right? The term contradiction,
Oh shit, dude.
the same
He's gonna keep on
semantic
yapping.
obviously proves something like contradiction or something like black
Better than
swans or
these
like
words.
gibblegosh actually exists, right? So your premise 3 is unjustified, even if or unless we already have like independent reason to think that God does exist, right? So even if like this is like the logic you want to shit.
Yeah, so tell me
right?
how it is the case that premise 3 cannot be true without the conclusion be true, retard.
Normally valid, that's fine.
He doesn't even address the point. He's retarded.
What do you like explain this to you multiple times, you little shitter? Like maybe
Let's
that could like
back
get
to the
past your mind next time.
moderation, dude. Let's get
But yeah,
back
I have
to
no
the
idea what you
topic,
mean. Okay, so since you've been begging for moderation and a chance to respond to you, and
You're
hopefully
the
you
first
don't.
person to ask for moderation, retard. You're good at talking stick, dude.
Go
What are you talking about? You agree to talking still.
You can calm down.
That's your response to what I just said a while ago? That's crazy stuff, dude. Anyway, so you said the argument was quest and beg, and then you said premise 3 would entail that the conclusion is true. Just because it is the case that a particular premise entails a particular proposition does not
I was like-
automatically indicate that the argument is quest and begging. So we see several instances of this, by the way, in logic, for example, when you have a true conditional sentence, like
I was-
P implies Q, for instance,
Wait.
in the strict implication sense, right?
Wait,
so
Apollo,
I'm telling
pause
you that you
yourself. I
mentioned
was
the
lagging.
point of
I didn't hear what you
premises-
said.
one of the premises.
Yo, Apollo,
Okay,
Apollo.
this
I
guy's
couldn't
just
hear
gonna
you.
talk
Repeat your
fast.
point. Yeah,
So
repeat
No,
are
your
we
you
gonna
can
go
hear what
back
I'm
to
saying, he's
talking
just
to
taking his chance to
agreed on or
dodge.
no? Which one is it? He's
Yeah,
scared.
no,
He wants
this
to
guy's
talk
also
about
autistic.
talk over the
Go
person
ahead, go
because
ahead.
it's bad rhetoric.
Yeah, go ahead, repeat it. Go ahead, repeat it. Go ahead, repeat it.
Yes, I'm going to repeat the point right now. So the point, I was repeating the point, but he's over talking because he's a retard. So the point is simply me mentioning the idea that something entailing a particular proposition is not a sufficient condition. You dumb fuck. That's why this question begging. There are several instances of something which entails a proposition, and it will not be question begging. So, for example, I'll give you like one pretty simple example. So, if you were to say that the premises of
I was lagging.
Socrates being a
You gotta
man,
repeat that.
all men be mortal.
I like
Should
repeat
you like
myself.
one
I
more
was
time or
lagging
repeat
again.
myself?
You have to repeat that.
Yeah, maybe if you just fix your Wi-Fi too. But here's gonna be the points I'm gonna be mentioning though. So the points I'm gonna be mentioning is
Dude,
simply,
that's so
you're
ironic.
saying
What?
that the justification. That's so ironic. What? He's interrupting again. Is we are gonna get moderation or the moderation is non-existent? Pun intended, by the way. What's going on? So, anyways, I'm gonna get back to the points I was mentioning. You're saying that because premise 3 entails the proposition that God exists and therefore the argument is question begging. That is one of the most retarded objections I've ever heard, by the way. You can have arguments where premises entails a particular proposition and it is not question begging. For something to be question begging, it has to be the case the conclusion is logically contained within the premise. But something can logically entail a conclusion without the conclusion being logically contained within the premise, retard. So that's just a blunder again. Don't really know what you're talking about there. And not to mention, you're not even establishing sufficiently how this question begging, you're just repeating the same thing over and over and not giving any adequate justification. I'm going to give you another chance. How exactly does it follow from something entail a particular proposition that is question begging? We see several instances by the logic in which we have conditional sentences, whereas the antecedent entails the consequence, and it is not question begging. It is not a question begging argument, right? It's not a question begging proposition either.
What?
But tell me how that would be the case.
This guy's
Is he lagging? Is he lagging?
Yeah, you're cutting out. You're cutting out a lot. You're lagging a lot.
Oh
Bro.
my god.
Archie got the
I've, like,
Jamaican Wi-Fi, dude.
it's
What's
not
going on, retard? Oh shit, the Jamaican Wi-Fi kicking in, Archie.
Yeah,
Oh
like
shit, dude.
you're
I'm not
like
even using Wi-Fi right now. My connection is better. I'm even outside, dude. What the fuck? Fix your Wi-Fi, you
can't
dumbass.
can't hear you at all, bro.
Yeah, Archie, lock in, dude.
Mm.
And just to be
Why
clear,
you talking
Ace, he
about
agreed to
Jamaican
talk.
Wi-Fi,
Just to be
bro?
clear, Ace, he agreed to talk and stick, and then now he switched over and started interrupting my phone because it's like insecure and shit. That's crazy.
I don't
bro.
know if you can hear me. This is like really, really bad.
Now we can.
can
Now
hear
we
you now,
can.
retard.
Now we
Got
can.
you.
Now we can. Now we can.
This guy dragging.
You're cutting out again. God damn your
Holy
Wi-Fi, bro.
crap.
You got data?
Oh, Apollo Jamaican Wi-Fi kicking in, Archie. What's going on, dude? Oh shit, dude. That's crazy. Fix your Wi-Fi, dude. That's crazy. That Jamaican Wi-Fi kicking in. Oh shit.
I'm hearing like the Jamaican free the goat in my ear.
I'm hearing that
Can you
the Jamaican free to go. You have a response to the argument or the question.
hear this?
Waiting for the response, by the way. The
Let me see if it's just this stage.
Jamaican Wi-Fi, dude. What the fuck? The irony, dude. Holy fucking shit, dude. Fucking irony from Archie. Fucking irony. Bad Wi-Fi, bad rhetoric, bad argumentation, bad everything on dude. Holy fuck. Today's just not your day, retard. Yo, can anyone hear the dumb fuck? Ace, is it just me or is he like still not like audible?
What? Nah, you're lagging so much, bro.
Oh shit, the karma is crazy, bro.
I think your
I thought
PC's
I was gonna
Wi-Fi
start a
is
bunch of
your
bad Wi-Fi.
PC's
What the fuck?
PC's Wi-Fi is significantly worse than your phone's. I suggest go back to your phone.
But guess what? Guess what, Ace? If he goes back to his phone, he can't overtalk me. Oh shit,
No,
Arch,
no,
what is
there's
he
no
gonna
need,
do?
no need for overtalking from either side. You know what I mean? It'll be alright.
I'm down to do talking stick, by the way. I have no issue doing that. We're doing talking stick, but he tried to interrupt.
You guys
Yo,
We're trying to
Yo, what's
insecure
good,
this
Taj, bro?
crazy.
Yo, Taj, moderate,
What's
bro.
up,
I'm
Dead
eating.
Boy?
Moderate, bro. I'm eating.
Nigga, you try to
Yeah,
thrust
that was
me
the
up here.
perfect moderator.
Fuck it though. Fuck it. They bring Archie back up, bro.
He left real quick to reset his Wi-Fi.
No.
Give him a sec.
What the fuck the topic? What the topic is?
Go-
I ain't even
The oldest topic ever, bro. God's existence.
know. Who got who?
Yeah, bro. Apollo is arguing for, and Archie is arguing against.
Oh my goodness, can you hear me?
Now you hear you now, bro.
Holy crap, dude. Wait, did I just hear Apollo stray himself? There's no chance. I'm on you.
Did he just lag again, dude? Oh shit, I'm not hearing that correctly.
Internet, like I'm about. Yo, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Oh, it says you're speaking on me. Yeah, I'm lagging bad. Yeah, what was your? Oh yeah, I think you said like antecedents entail the consequence. What are you talking about? Like, what kind of entailment are you talking about?
I'm talking about the strict implication, retard.
You understand like what an entailment is concerning logic, right?
That doesn't answer my point. I was talking about the strict implication.
Answer the question.
I'm saying your question is irrelevant to my point, retard. My point is simply I was talking about the strict
Really,
implication. You asked me.
already.
What was
You
I-
understand
what
like
was I talking
logical
about? I'm telling you right now, I was talking about the strict implication.
I don't know why you're over talking me. This is like really bad.
I don't know why you're over talking me. You're saying that with a laggy PC. You're fucking stupid. If I were you to just go back to talking stick, retard. So I'm telling you that you asked me what was I talking about. I'm telling you I was talking about the strict implication, right?
Like-
That's what I'm talking about, dumbass. Now again, you asking me.
Holy
why
crap!
is
I
it
don't know
gonna
why my
be-
internet was being so
why is
laggy. Yeah, I
logical
was gonna
entailment
say like
irrelevant?
logical entailment is not the kind of thing that's shared. At least when it's talking about like conditionals, right? Like when we say like a premise entails a given conclusion, or when we talk about a statement entailing another statement, saying it seemed to turn out that can be generated in which one of the statements, or at least the one that's supposed to be negated, is true and that one is false. Right? That's all.
How does this adjust my point, retard?
So talking about like
How does this
actual
address my
cases
point, retard?
in which, like, are you autistic?
Repeat back to what my point is, retard.
Okay, so you talking like begging the question. If you're saying that when a premise entails, or when your premise like seems to be contained within, you understand.
That's not what I'm talking about, retard. You're stupid. Your argument is you
So-
saying that premise 3, shut up, you're retarded. You don't know what you're talking about. Your
When you
argument
want
is
it
saying that premise
generated
3 entails the conclusion. You're lagging, by the way. You're lagging, just to be clear. You're saying that premise 3 entails the conclusion. Archie, you're lagging. You're lagging, Archie. You're lagging. You're saying premise 3 entails the conclusion, and therefore it would be the case that the argument is questioned beggar. I'm telling you here that simply an entailment relation between two propositions is not sufficient. And I repeat, it's not sufficient for an argument to be question begged. You can have several case scenarios in which you have one proposition which entails another proposition, and there's no question begging argumentation, dumbass. That's the whole point.
No,
That would get it moderately.
Archie, I can't hear you, bro. You gotta restart. You gotta like do it again. Cause you're
Archie's trying to overtalk me, and he's lagging out. I'm literally saying pick talking stick. If I wanted, I could utilize his lagging. My advantage is just over talking the entire time, but I'm even proposing a talking stick to help this retard that's in rhetoric.
You need to like, I only gotta restart it again because you were making points. You were making points, but no one heard you. I'm not being honest.
Nah, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, no one heard you.
I'll just repeat them. So the main like idea is just simply this. Like there was a bit of a confusion you had, Apollo. Like when we're talking about like a premise being contained, or when a conclusion is contained in a given premise, that's not the same thing as to say it's entailed, right? You like tried to slip that in. I agree with you, Richard. That's the whole point. The main idea, that was my point. Congratulations, you can like calm yourself down for a second.
Oh my god, dude, I'm not going to be calm. I'm going to keep on crashing out because you're being retarded. I'm going to keep on crashing out because you're retarded. I'm going to keep on crashing out because you're being retarded, right? So I'm going to crash out. Hey, look at Arch. He's going to be the emotional.
You just got to relax there a little bit. Yeah, you just got to relax there a little bit.
You established the distinction between there being something being logically contained. Look at him keep on saying calm down. Oh, look at him, dude. He thinks every single time he tells me to calm down, he's actually attacking my argument. Oh shit, look at this rhetoric. This wonderful rhetoric display. Oh shit, so let's get back to the point. I'm telling you, Archie, that there's a distinction. So you're agreeing with my points right now. You telling me to relax right now is the counter argument. It's the counter argument, Archie. Sadly, it's the counter argument. So to get back to the point, oh look at him. He's saying the same thing over and over. He has no good rhetoric. This microwave logic. He's not going to work with you, retard. So to get back to the point here, he's just wanting to address the point. Okay, so
you're kind of talking to yourself. You just got to relax there. So the main idea that I was gonna say before your retarded ass decided to gibberish, right, is just like simply gonna be this. So obviously, right, what I'm simply saying is that when your premise does happen to contain your conclusion, that's gonna be begging the question. The reason why it's begging the question, the reason why it's circular and not the kind of reasoning that we're gonna accept in this kind of discourse, is simply because it doesn't actually turn out. It turns out when you're trying to reason to your conclusion.
Oh shit, dude, you're like unconfident, dude. Did he bug out or something? Oh shit, dude, this is just a bad day for Archie fans, dude. Holy shit, dude. This is crazy stuff. Yeah, so the argument Archie was given basically was him saying that because the premise entails the conclusion,
the reasons without accepting the conclusion. Obviously, that's just going to mean
conclusion, and the argument is not possible. Somebody understanding of this concept. So you're incorrect in this, Archie.
Yeah, I was
wildly confused.
Hold on.
What's up?
I don't really care if like y'all like going at each other, but like y'all can't actually just make points at the same exact time. So
I'm down to do talking stick. I'm down to do it. I agree with it.
I don't know why he's like crying so bad.
Trash mic and he's getting blown apart.
I don't know why he's crying so bad.
That's up to y'all if you want to talk.
I don't know it's crying so bad.
That's up to y'all if y'all want to do talking stick. I don't really mind. I don't really mind if y'all like do it how y'all doing, but y'all just can't like literally argue at the same time.
Roasting them crying. I'm having the fun of my life right now, dude. What the fuck? I'm enjoying this.
I think you just gotta muzzle him. He's like autistic. He doesn't know how to stop speaking.
He's like autistic.
I don't know why
you said it in the most autistic tone whatsoever. That's
is it okay
crazy.
If you can put a muzzle on him, dead boy? I don't know. Why
but you just said a while ago we should just do back and forth.
I'm just trying to make my point.
You together talking stick. So what's up now? Why are you changing up now?
Apollo, you could just let Archie. You could let Archie make a point. It's just only because like we haven't been able to hear a point from him in the past.
But dead boy, Archie said.
I don't know why you're trying to reason with like an actual like floor state right now.
Trying for moderation. Now it's trying for moderation. When it doesn't favor him, that's crazy stuff.
No, look.
He said, "Don't do moderation." Now he's begging for moderation.
Hold on.
The hypocrisy is crazy, Archie.
Like I said, I don't care.
Right now. He's like not even confident in his speech patterns. You dumb fuck.
I don't care if y'all go at
Where's the confidence, Archie? What's up with that PC?
I don't care if y'all go at each other. I don't care if y'all go at each other. But when it comes to like, I don't care if y'all go at each other. But when it comes to the substance, we just need to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know why you're.
Okay, I'm down to do talking stick.
I really don't get it.
You just cried for moderation. The irony is crazy, dude. Oh, should give her garbage points, retard. Just explain to me how polishing something and tell to give a proposition that is classified by you. Go ahead.
I don't really
give the arguments, retard.
Himself right now. This is like really bad. Oh, he's still not done. Okay. So we got the alien on mute. Okay, cool. So the main idea is like really this. So you made like a bit of a blunder earlier. And again, like we'll try to correct this. I don't really know why you were like laughing at yourself, right? But we probably shouldn't do things like that. The main idea is just this. So like just definitionally, what it means to beg the question or commit yourself to circular reasoning, right, is when one of the reasons in your process of justification or reasoning to a given conclusion, right, when one of those reasons happens to contain the very conclusion you're trying to reason to, right? So for example, if I was the one trying to reason to the existence of polar bears, right, and what I told you is that the reason why polar bears exist is because I saw a polar bear chomp at someone yesterday. The reason why that might be interpreted as question begging in some circles is because the literal action, Apollo, like biting someone, it turns out that it's just logically prior that that polar bear exists before biting someone. So that means one of the actions, in order to act, you must already exist. So it turns out we can't actually accept that reason for polar bears existing without them already existing. Okay. So now that we've broken down begging the question one-on-one, the reason why what you did was begging the question, right, is because obviously under a non-Minogian view, right, under a non-Minogianism, right, to refer to something, just what it means to refer is just to presuppose its existence, right? And in your third premise, translatively, you're just saying God refers. This is the same exact thing as saying God exists, Apollo. Okay, so walk with me here. If you're saying that God simply exists in your third premise, and your conclusion is attempted to be God exists, that actually simply means that God's existence is already contained within your premise, right? Now, the reason why what I said was a blunder is because you said, well, there can be instances between where, you know, in an argument, it seems a premise is already containing the conclusion, and you gave the example of a material conditional. A material conditional is simply saying, if P, then Q. This is not an entailment, right? Because it does turn out that when we're saying if P then Q, it does turn out that there are plenty of possible cases in which we could accept P, but simply deny Q, right? If that's the case, the kind of relation we're talking about is not one of entailment, right? The antecedent doesn't entail the consequent, Apollo. That's not what we're talking about. Logical entailment, which is what we are talking about specifically, is just the kind of entailment in which if we were to accept the reasons or the premises, we must accept the consequent. And it turns out there's no logical case where we can accept the premises as true and deny the conclusion, right? So if that's the kind of argument you're attempting to make, right, and it turns out one of the premises actually does have the conclusion already assumptively taken to be true, it turns out that you're actually begging the question. And this is going to be erroneous for several reasons. Okay. So do you want to that? Like, did that wrap around your head?
That's easy to respond to, retard. Just because we take a particular premise of an argument to be true, you're saying, oh, we're saying the premise is to be true, therefore the argument is quasi begging. That doesn't automatically indicate or suggest evidentially the argument is quasi begging, retard. And by the way, you thought for some reason that one of the premises are identical to the conclusion. No, there's no premise of the argument which is trivially identical to the conclusion. That's incorrect. Okay, so I don't know where you get that part from. The conclusion is saying God exists objectively, right? God existing and God existing objectively are two different things. You can have a case scenario as God exists, or the proposition rather that God exists is conceptually open to the possibility of God existing as a fictional object, which, by the way, I reject to be a possibility. But given the semantics of existence, existence is conceptually open to subjective or mind-dependent existence. Meaning that you establishing that it is the case that I've established that God exists, right? And there's a contradiction in God existing subjectively or mind-dependently, therefore God exists objectively, would not be a question-begging argument, you dumb fucking idiots, you imbecilic ape, right? That would be an indication of a disjunctive introduction, right? Whereas you have two disjuncts, namely P or not P, and we know that P is false, and so it follows that not P is true. So P would be God either exists, right, objectively, or sorry, you could say God either exists mind dependently or mind independently, and then you say there's a contradiction in God exists mind dependently, so that disjunct is false. And so the conclusion is, given disjunctive introduction and disjunctive elimination, which would be the case that God exists objectively, mind independently. That's the question begging argument, you idiot. You're like trying to say that because the premises entails the conclusion, given what we know, then that's going to be evidence for it question begging. That's retarded. That's like me saying if I assert the conditional sentence that if something is a triangle, then it is a polygon. That's question begging. No, you dumbass. That's just entails from the facts of arithmetic. Same logic applies here. So to get back to the point here, there's no premise of the argument which is identical semantically to God existing objectively. For you to say that something is logically contained within something else, given how it's utilized in content terminologies, is to say it's an analytic fact. To say it's trivially identical, which is going to be a circular, or it's going to be a vicious circular argument. That's not what the argument is. There's no premise of the argument which is semantically or trivially identical to the conclusion. That's not correct, right? So that was incorrect, for example. You can say, for instance, like 2 + 2 = 4. Given the piano axioms of mathematics and what the addition rule actually is, it would be in fact the case that if you add 2 with 2, it follows necessarily that you get 4. However, it doesn't mean that 4 is contained in the concept 2 + 2. No, it's called synthetic a priori judgments, you dumbass. These are synthetic necessary facts. So you have synthetically necessary facts and you have analytically necessary. What you'd be talking about in the case of question begging arguments would be an analytically necessary fact, not something which is synthetically necessary, which, by the way, debunked to being question begging. You've not demonstrated how it would be the case that my premise or any of the premises of my argument is analytically identical to my proposed conclusion for it to be the case it will be question begging. So you're just dead wrong in this, you dumbass retard. That's number one. Number two is I've demonstrated the contrary as to why it would not be question begging, given the very fact that I've just demonstrated the inference rules of the argument and shown you as to why, by definition, or sorry, given how logic works, which clearly you don't know how logic works because you're illogical, you're irrational, and you're retarded, and you're imbecilic, and you're a dumb fuck, it would in fact be the case, you fucking stupid moron, that it would be true that this would not be a question-begging argument, so you committed a massive fucking blunder because you're a low IQ debater. So now, how about you get off this point, stop embarrassing yourself, stop to like go on this like little session of embarrassing yourself and get out to a new point because you got dunked on this point so badly to the point it's pretty obvious to any unbiased, intelligent person, any competent person that you got blown.
I don't know why you're talking to yourself. This is like
I don't know what you're talking to.
The main idea is
let me ask you a question. So Archie and Apollo, y'all think y'all both like said shit to where y'all won?
I'm certain I responded to these trash arguments.
I'll like respond to a few more things.
He's not. He's insecure.
Yeah.
He
So
doesn't know if he's responded.
I don't know. You just got to calm yourself for a second. I mean,
I'm never gonna calm myself.
You just got to calm yourself.
I'm never gonna calm myself. I'm not gonna calm myself. I'm gonna keep on being late. I'm gonna keep on being happy.
Dead boy, do you want to like put a muzzle on him?
Yeah, but they should someone being happy, Archie.
Hey, Apollo, let him respond just so y'all can like.
Okay, Archie, respond. Go for it.
Y'all been debating for a minute.
Yeah,
he's been just like a little autistic. I'm sorry it's taken this long, but the main idea is like really this, like to respond to your point, obviously we recognize that the kind of point you're trying to make, you're just trying to say, well, it simply seems that when we refer to things or that when things exist, they either exist mind dependently or mind independently, right? And then you follow on this course saying it's consistent with the definition of how you understand God, that he simply can't be existing mind dependently and that entails a contradiction. That's not the point we're confused on, right? We've heard you repeat that 5 different times, Apollo, in a failed attempt to respond to my points, right? So just to be clear, that's not the confusion, right? The issue is, right, obviously, when you're trying to make an argument, right, saying only, when you're basically saying non-monogeism is true, which is just what's entailed in your first premise, that's just what your first premise is, right? You're saying that only existing things can be referred to, non-existent things don't have a reference, right? So for any X either exists in virtue of the mind or not in virtue of the mind. You want to say the term God does refer, right? Referring is simply like just implying the existence. You're just saying he exists due to your premise 1. And you're just saying that if he exists in virtue of the mind, he just simply be causally limited. And since he's omnipotent, he can't. So obviously he can't be mind dependent. Now we understand that part, but we also have to understand what it means to be circular and question Beg Apollo. Like, in fact, I've seen like Eric and a few people try to explain this to you as well. Like, I mean, generally when we try to like make an argument, right? When the argument assumes what it's trying to prove, genuinely we understand that to be erroneous reasoning, right? Like an argument, for all it means for an argument to question beg is just when the truth of one or more of the premises depends on the truth of the conclusion, right? It's not false, right? So we're not saying it's false, it's just kind of useless, right? Because you're not actually getting to justifying your conclusion, you're just basically restating it. Right? I'll walk you through where the circularity in your argument happens. So when you say non-monogism is true, like when you apply this to your premise one, to be clear, that's just a view that states only existing things can be referred to. So for example, if I were to say I'm referring to a black horse, now we understand that if it in itself would be some kind of proof that black horses exist. If I say I'm referring to some kind of star that can fly through the moment of our sun, yeah, that thing exists under non-monogism, right? Because we can refer to it. Now, the reason why this implies or presupposes God's existence is because in your premise 3, you want to translatively just say, well, yeah, we can refer to God, right? Obviously, God is a thing. We can refer to God. And off of first listen, that may not seem question begging because you're just like, yeah, I mean, whether God exists or not, he's clearly a thing. No. Under your view, that just simply means he exists, right? Because what it means to refer to something, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong. If you want to drop this, you can, just like you drop fine tuning. But if what you mean to say is that he refers, that's just simply saying, right, that he exists, right? You're just simply saying that, yeah, we can refer to him, so therefore he exists in this kind of way or in this kind of way. But the question is, I'm not too sure if he exists, period, right? That's what we want to get to, right? The conclusion just repeats what's already being implicit, right? Or what's already implicit, right? Obviously, if the conclusion God exists doesn't follow from any of the reasonings about the world, right? It just follows from how the word refers and how that's defined in P1. It's just circular because the conclusion God exists is just logically equivalent to God refers, just given your first premise. You're just saying the same thing, right? Now, obviously,
okay, so the conclusion of the argument, Archie,
kind of issue of whether it's
the conclusion of the argument is God exists
right?
objectively.
Obviously, if it gives you could just calm yourself down a little bit.
I'm calm right now, but you need to actually
reason,
try the
can
conversation.
someone just has to put a muzzle on this guy. He's just unstoppable.
That was a straw man, Archie. What are you
The main
doing?
idea
That's
is
what I
really
can do.
this.
That was a
Like when
straw
you
man.
say, someone just has to like put a muzzle on this guy. It's like really, really bad.
Someone just had to put the muzzle.
Generally, like when we
Someone has to
talk
put the muzzle
about
in.
arguments being valid, I'm not saying your argument is invalid or anything like that. I'm just simply saying that it doesn't seem like we have any motivation to believe in non-monogism. It seems even upon believing in non-monogism, that's not going to be something that suggests that God exists unless we're committing to very, very strange commitments of existence, including non-existent gods or whatever. And it just seems like when we're talking about begging the question, that this would obviously be begging the question.
Okay, so first and foremost, the argument isn't just ended with the conclusion that God exists, but rather God exists objectively. So by definition, that would not be logically or semantically equivalent to any of the premises, because none of the premises is stating that God exists objectively. It's just saying, for example, there's a contradiction in God exists mind dependently, and either God exists mind dependently or mind independently. Now, you finally gave a decent objection for once in this long conversation, this long-winded conversation. Oh, I don't accept him existing at all. Okay, now you said that I was question begging on the existence concept. It's as if this guy just does not remember basic details of a fucking conversation. It's as if he forgot me referencing back to the 1970s theory called domain. The 1970s theory is from in Scott, by the way. Sorry, domain theory, for example, which establishes the meta-ontological entailment, right, or the meta-ontological position I have, and then I gave evidence for this. My evidence was the logical intuitions insofar as we have the position of it being logically possible for it being the case that idealism and solipsism is true. So clearly, existence and reality is not confined to mind-independent things. That logical possibility entails it being the case. You forgot all of those points because you're retarded. Oh, he talks about putting the muzzle.
This isn't my critique.
Just overtalk right now. So just to overtalk Archie because you want to overtalk. So I'm saying that the logical intuitions we have with respect to the possibility, of solipsism or idealism being true would entail it being false. That reality or existence concepts are not confined to the logical possibility. I can't understand what you're saying. Mind-independent object. You can have mental stuff which exists and mental stuff don't understand what you're saying. He conceded this, by the way. So just
I can't understand what you're saying.
You can't understand anything, Archie. We expect this. You're retarded. So
no, I was just saying because your mic was a bit muffled.
Not surprising, Archie, because you're retarded. We can't understand your points anyways. Oh well,
your mic being muffled makes me retarded. This guy's a
yeah,
genius.
really, definitely. You think that's gonna work on me? These low trigger that mind tricks, Archie? Stop doing it.
You could just continue your
Just to get
point.
back to the
It's
point.
okay.
Oh, look at him. He's so scared for me to finish the point. It's actually embarrassing stuff.
Me asking you to finish
he
your point is
lost
being
the
scared.
conversation.
Just give your point. No one cares about this meta stuff.
You know he lost the conversation
Dude,
when he's doing
could
this
you just
stuff.
give your
You know
point?
he lost the conversation.
No one's interested in this stuff. No, you're not. Just give the point.
The entire time.
You have the choice to at
How many
that
minutes?
right now. This guy's like
minutes?
actually trying.
Yeah, he's like actually.
Are you okay?
About to start.
Are you mentally okay?
So just to be clear, in this it's
Okay. My point is that it's circular. Just address that point to be clear.
Yes. I addressed the point actually, so I'm gonna go.
Wrong, but
by
you
the
told
way.
me is that you weren't saying it objectively
pray,
exists.
so
No one said that it objectively
Short summary,
exists.
man.
That wasn't my point.
So I'm gonna
To be
come
clear.
back. We can continue the argument.
No, you can just address it right now since we don't have that much